The two most outstanding things I discovered was I did the ancestry of Dame Judi Dench, who of course is an absolutely wonderful actress. I discovered that she had a great-grandfather who was a bigamist, a man called George Joseph Dench, who was he was a customs officer down in Weymouth. Although Judy was born in York, she's a Yorkshire woman, but the family originally came from Weymouth. I found Denches, dozens of them down there. But yeah, this great-grandfather of hers, George Joseph Dench, was a customs officer. He first married in 1859, had half a dozen kids. He was still there in the 1871 census. And then in the 1881 census, the wife and children were still in Weymouth, but he was missing. I eventually tracked him down, living in a house in South London in Battersea, with a young widow called Bessie Higgs. I dubbed her Bessie of Battersea, and he never went back to Weymouth. I discovered that he had two children with this lady, and then went through a marriage with her in 1887 at the local register office, and at this time it obviously was a bigamous marriage, because I couldn't find a divorce, and ordinary people couldn't get divorced in those days anyway. They couldn't afford it, and his first and legal wife was still very much alive. She was in the 1891 census. He died in 1898. She was in the 1901 census. And I haven't looked for him in 1911. She must be there, because she died in 1914. She well outlived him. So there's no doubt whatsoever he committed bigamy. When I sort of passed this on to Judi Dench through her PA, she was very sweet about it. She said she didn't mind if I used it, and she felt sure, he wasn't the only infamous or naughty ancestor that she had. Everybody had them basically, and of course she's quite right. I've uncovered at least half a dozen bigamous marriages in the course of my researches, including my own wife, who had a great-grandmother who committed bigamy in Coventry in the 1890s, when she married a younger man whilst her first and legal husband was still very much alive. And I found others as well, and I suspect that what I found was just the tip of the iceberg. Because in Victorian times, ordinary working people couldn't get a divorce basically until legal aid came in the 1920s. So I suspect they just went off with somebody else, married them, and it was never found. It was never uncovered. Probably the thing I'm most proud of all is last year I did the ancestry of Josephine Tewson, the comedy actress, lovely comedy actress who is in Keeping Up Appearances. She's the next door neighbour of Hyacinth Bucket, and she's also in Last of the Summer Wine as the spinster librarian. I met her actually at the Who Do You Think You Are show at Olympia. She was on a stand there of the Richard III Society. I recognised her, of course, went up and introduced myself and asked if I could do her family tree, and she laughed and she said, "Well, you'll only be able to do half of it." And I said, "Well, why is that?" She said, "Because my dad was a foundling, and he was brought up in the famous Foundling Hospital established by Thomas Coram in London, in Bloomsbury, in 1739. And she said, "You've got no chance of finding out who he was." Well, if somebody says that to me, I'd take it as a challenge. So I thought, right, I'll have a go. Her mother's ancestry was no problem. They came from Derby and Sheffield, and they were quite prominent and well off. But the father had been left at the Foundling Hospital in 1905 when he was born. I went to the Thomas Coram people. The hospital no longer exists, but there's still a charity which does much work for children. Got in touch with a senior social worker, and she said, "Yes, we can." I explained the circumstances, and she said, "Yes, we can open the records for you." In cases where I said I was acting for someone who was the next of kin, and the father had long died. He died in the 1960s, and took a few months, but Josephine and I eventually went along and had a wonderful interview with this lady, and she produced a whole report for us: who the father was, who his mother was, who the putative father was, etc. names, details, addresses, chapter and verse, Armed with his real name, I was then able to get his original birth certificate from the GRO, and I traced the family back several generations, back to great-grandparents, and Jo was thrilled to bits, really, because suddenly she had a whole family of ancestors she'd never known about. I mean, it was quite moving. She actually burst into tears in the office, and I almost did too. But I mean, I was really thrilled for her, and we've become quite good friends since. But yeah, that's probably my proudest moment, I think, in all the years I've been doing family history.